Welcome to the Audacious Life podcast. I'm your host, Steph Roberts, and today I finally have Lundy Bancroft. And Lundy does not need a big introduction, but I'm going to let him say who he is for those of you who may not be aware of him, and then we will jump into the interview. So welcome, Lundy.
Thank you. So I'm most known for my work with domestic violence perpetrators, with men who abuse women. And I came into that work more than 30 years ago. And I came into this issue from a social justice perspective. And when people ask me, like, what brought you here, they tend to assume, oh, there must be some personal connection. Maybe my father was an abuser, which he was not, or, somehow I'd had domestic abuse in my personal life, and I hadn't. I actually knew almost nothing about it until I started to learn about it in my early 20s. But what I did have from very early in life was a social justice orientation. I grew up in a family where we talked about what was going on in the world. We talked about what was right and wrong. I grew up in a family where we learned to be on the side of the people who were being downtrodden, who were being exploited, to be on the side of poor people or be on the side of people of color. I didn't necessarily grow up with tons of images, with tons of encouragement to be on the side of women. I didn't get a lot of negative messages about women, not nearly as much as some boys get. But I can't say I got lots of pro messages. My parents just weren't terribly involved in that, in the issue of women's rights. But what I did grow up with that was personal was I grew up with big sisters that were strong, cool, loving people. And so they were great role models for me of really self-assured, dynamic, outspoken females. And as I moved into my 20s and started to learn a lot more about women's rights issues, it just really resonated with me for no other reason than that it was a social justice issue, and that to me it connected personally to women that I'd cared about in my life. And I wish men would make that obvious connection more often, and a lot of men do, but I just wish more men would make that obvious connection. Like, you got women in your life that you love, so how about caring more about women's rights? Like, why wouldn't you care more about that? One other thing I want to say about this is that we really shouldn't be as surprised when men are interested in being an ally to women's causes. That's what men ought to be doing. And we should just be like, yeah, great, thanks. Glad to have you on board. But not like, wow, why are you doing this? That's so great, or that's so special, or that's so amazing. Good point. And the parallel that I like to make is that the country is full of white people who have made it their cause to fight against racism. And people don't act all kind of surprised and curious about that. They don't go like, well, but wait a minute, now why would you as a white person be taking on this cause of people of color? Like, what's up with that? Did you have some personal experience, or like, well, yeah, how, like this, there's not that immediate sense of like, what's up with that? There's just a sense of like, oh, you care about justice? Yeah, you should be involved in this. And so I would just encourage people to take that same attitude towards male allies. Like, yeah, yeah, that's a great thing to be doing. Glad you care enough to do it, but we're not going to be amazed by it either. Exactly. And so when I was in my mid-20s, I started to work at a counseling program for men who abuse women. And it was actually the first counseling program in the country that was specifically for dealing with domestic abuse perpetrators. And then that's what shaped me, started to really form my understanding of the issue. I spent so much time around abusers. And here's another key. In a program where we always kept in touch by telephone with the abused woman. So she kept us in reality. And people who work with abusers who aren't keeping in contact with the abused woman and aren't on her side, they're in the dark. And in fact, they can do more harm than good. This would be a long subject for another day. But you really don't know what you're doing if you're working with abusers and you're not hearing the real story. Abusers are so persuasive, as your audience knows, Stephanie. They're so convincing. They're so good at getting everybody on their side. And the abuser program, unfortunately, sometimes just becomes another force that they win over onto their side. So now I've been sort of 30 years in domestic abuse and decided that I really needed now to move into a new phase in life. 30 years was enough. And so I'm largely now fading out of domestic abuse. Obviously, I still talk about it publicly some, but I'm moving much more into fiction writing instead of the nonfiction writing that I've done. And the organization that we'll come back and talk about later, the Peak Living Network, which is not domestic abuse related. It's a general emotional healing organization for both women and men, and for anyone who's interested in pursuing their healing.
Love that. Yeah. So thank you for giving me that background so quickly. You did great. I did wonder about that because the reason why I asked that question is so many people going back to that interview, and it was not a good interview on my end because I was new to podcasting and I had a mic that was making all this noise. Everything you said was great. I think the content was great, but people have to struggle through all these crazy sounds. So that's why I have workers outside. Like, this is our second time rescheduling for various reasons, one of them being noise. And so I'm like crossing my fingers, like, please, Lord, let them not have to suffer again. So we have a little reprieve. But one of the things that always comes up is your book. Why does he do that? And women say that part of what really helped them was the fact that you are male and you were writing about the perspective of the male abuser, but you were very in tune with the women and all the things you just said. And so that was why I wanted to ask you that question, because I feel like there's so many books out there now to help people learn about abuse, emotional abuse, hidden abuse, narcissists, not narcissists. We'll talk about that too. But the fact that you are male, for whatever reason, really helps women to feel like this isn't just some, woman who wrote a book from her perspective, kind of trying to identify men. You have this background that you just mentioned, plus you have the heart of a man who really cares, and it really comes across the pages of all your books, I think.
I'm really glad that comes across, and that makes a difference. And one thing that somebody said once that I really liked is they said, "Oh, you're like someone who, like from a football game, who managed to sneak onto the other team's side and get hold of their playbook, and you leaked it to our side." And so I like that image, that I got with the abusers and got my hands on their playbook and then leaked it to women.
Right. I love that. Yeah. And if anyone's listening, they haven't read any of your books, 100% have to jump in. And, I have another episode that came before this, actually, Lundy, about, us not quite making it, and then talking about a few other things that we're going to cover here. But the other thing is, you just wrote this article called The Narcissist versus Abuser, right, on your blog. And I have, for many, many years, really avoided the word narcissist. In the beginning, I used it a lot. What I saw is a real big movement toward, this is even before Trump, really using that word and interchanging it with abuser, but also making the narcissist this like scary, scary, evil person who has all the power, and we have no power, the devil almost, right? Like this evil force. So I would love to hear your perspective on what made you write that blog post, and what's the heart of it? Like, what do you see as that difference, and how can we better understand what's happening in the way that people discuss narcissism and abuse kind of interchangeably? What do we need to know about that?
So there are a number of things that concern me about the general trend now towards referring to abusers as narcissists. And I think that some abusers are also narcissists, but they're still abusers. And then I think the great majority of abusers are actually not narcissists. And so there's a number of questions here. There's questions like, why does it matter? And there are questions about, like, how do you tell the difference? But let me talk first about this question about why does it matter?
Yeah.
First of all, the domestic abuser has some key things in common with a narcissist. So this is a lot of why these things get mixed up. The nature of any personality disorder, and narcissism is in a whole category that's known as personality disorder, of mental health problems. The nature of a personality disorder is that you have really destructive behavior patterns. You may primarily hurt other people, or you may primarily hurt yourself, or you may do a lot of both. Sometimes they get very mixed, but you have you do a lot of hurting of people, and you're convinced that it's not your problem. You're convinced that it's things that are wrong with other people that are causing your behavior and that are causing these things to happen. And that's one of the reasons. There are other reasons, but that's one of the reasons why personality disorder doesn't respond to therapy. I mean, how's therapy going to help someone who doesn't believe the problem resides in them?
Right. That's a great point.
And there's other reasons, but so abusers have that same pattern, that they believe that he believes that the woman is causing his behavior, that he's not responsible for his own actions. So the problem resides in her, not in him. And he's got these recurring problems of behaving really destructively. And so that's why it's so easy for abusers to now just get labeled as narcissists.
Right.
So maybe before I talk about why I'm worried about it, I should talk first about just why is that inaccurate. Mm-hmm. So first of all, the abuser does very, very little that's ever harmful to himself. Mm. Whereas narcissists tend to, even if they're of the style where their primary damage is to other people, they still end up doing a lot of things that really aren't good for them either. Okay. And the abuser is so, he will smash everything all over the house when he's having one of his tirades and make sure to not break a single thing that matters to him. Like he knows what he's on about. This is not the same thing as a mental health problem. He knows what he's doing. There is a lot of method to the madness. And we have multiple research studies about abusers that show that his past trauma is, first of all, not on average significantly greater than non-abusive men. There's not evidence that they're significantly more traumatized. And the research studies also show that even where they are traumatized, that's not a major factor in why they're abusing women. Okay. The abuse of women, as multiple studies show, and as anyone who's worked long time in abuser programs like I have, can tell you, their problems with women are primarily rooted in attitudes that they grew up with. Okay. That say that in a relationship, they get to rule, that in a relationship, a woman owes them X, Y, and Z, you owe me, you owe me, you owe me. You got to do all these things for me all the time. The relationship should revolve around what you're going to do for me. And what's ultimately most destructive is they grew up with the belief in the man's right to enforce. In other words, he not only has the right to demand all these things of you and make rules for you and tell you what you can do and what you can't do, but he also feels that if you don't follow his rules, he has the right to make you follow them, to enforce. Yeah. He has the right to punish you until you're hurt enough that you have to do what he's telling you to do in order to relieve the pain, in order to get him to stop hurting you. It may not be physically hurting you, it might not be sexually hurting you. Most of it is psychologically hurting you, just being cruel. But it's really, really destructive. So the abuser is a product of a whole culture, and I'm not talking about a specific culture. I'm talking about a culture in the sense of a whole society that trains males, and as you can probably guess, I'm a former boy. This whole society that trains males that as we grow up, that we have a right to extract from women the way you would extract minerals from a piece of land. And we have the right to punish and retaliate when we don't get what we want. Don't you have a smile for me today, honey? It's like, if you don't smile for me, I get to get you back for it with some verbal abuse, right? Yeah. So that's very deep in our training. And so one of the reasons I'm so concerned about the dropping of the term abuser and the switching to the term narcissist, besides the fact that it's in most cases not accurate, is that it completely takes the onus off the society. It completely takes the onus off the community to deal with how we're raising our boys and to deal with what we're letting both boys and men get away with, and to deal with the messages that are in our books and movies, and the messages that are in pornography, and the messages that are in what a lot of our preachers are preaching, that gives men the right to behave in these ways. So all that is being avoided when we talk about narcissism, and instead we're focusing on him as having a mental health problem. And so then we're going to focus on how did he get, what are his wounds? Well, with the domestic abuser, his wounds actually, as I'm saying, don't have much to do with it. But narcissism gets us focused on his early wounds, what's called a narcissistic wound, which is like, what's the wound that led this person to be a narcissist? And that's really sending us off way in the wrong direction. It's also sending us off in a direction that doesn't help, because even if it is narcissism, since narcissism doesn't respond to therapy, what good does it do to find out, oh, does have narcissism? Right. It's like, okay, all that does is tell us that the situation now has an additional problem. It's like discovering that your abuser is an alcoholic. It's like, oh, not only am I dealing with an abuser, I'm dealing with an alcoholic. If it turns out he's a narcissist, it's like, oh God, not only am I dealing with an abuser, but he's a narcissistic abuser. That's going to make the problem even worse. It doesn't, there's nothing helpful about having arrived at that. Abusers have a very low rate of change, but narcissists have an even lower, true narcissists have an even lower rate of change. So it's not like, ooh, now that I know he's a narcissist, I can get him into the right service. The right service doesn't exist for personality disorder.
Wow, that's so good. And so what stood out for me with that is the patriarchal piece, the societal piece. So it sounds like, and this is the question I guess that came up, is so with an abuser, and again, my podcast is really focused a lot more on the emotional abuse than the physical abuse. Would you say there's a difference between the outright abuser versus the narcissistic abuser? Are the abusers the ones who are more likely to be physically violent, throw things, hurt, punch, kick, whatever, versus narcissists being more sly and more emotional and sneaky and manipulative? Or is that just me?
There's some truth to that. It's complicated because the sort of standard abuser, what I call the garden variety abuser, who's not got a personality disorder, is going to be very emotionally abusive. Every domestic abuser is very emotionally abusive. But there's some truth to what you're suggesting, because the narcissism is actually not linked to dangerousness.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Statistically speaking, if I find out he has a personality disorder, that does not increase the chance that he's extremely violent or likely to kill. Mm-hmm. And even abusers who kill are not typically personality disordered. Mm-hmm. So you're pointing to something that, in my experience, has some truth to it, that the narcissist is very focused on manipulation and emotional abuse. I have really found in all my cases is that even the guys who were true narcissists were also abusers. That you can't say, well, you don't find cases where it's just like a pure narcissist. A pure narcissism would not lead to these very specific behavior patterns that abusers have, of the way that they use, their status as a man against you and what you owe him as a woman. They don't, the whole way that the groundwork is laid ahead of time, the way that they're lying to you about their past partners. I mean, there's just a whole set of things. Mm-hmm. There are abusers who feel completely justified in everything they do from the very beginning and don't even bother to hide it very much. There's just so many different layers to this thing. And so it's, again, I keep bringing it back to the question of, so what does this mean in practical terms? What does this mean about what we do? Mm-hmm. And the abuser, you try to have legal consequences against them if you can, because those have been shown to have some positive effect. If he's arrested and prosecuted and convicted, the conviction is essential. Yeah. And if he ends up in an abuser program, and an abuser program, when it's being properly run, doesn't look anything like therapy. It's actually doing this is something, by the way, that a lot of people don't realize. Mm-hmm. But a properly run abuser program is not a support program. It's not a let's process our feelings program. It's about re-educating, re-socializing an abuser to completely change his attitudes and values and his whole way of thinking about women and his whole way of thinking about relationships. And it's about confronting him to give up his entitlements. And it's about confronting him to give up enforcement. So that's therapy doesn't look anything like that. Wow. You can send a guy to therapy. No one's going to be confronting his entitlements. No one's going to be educating him about that he needs to look really deeply at the kind of damage that he's done to women. No one's going to be pressing him that he realizes to look at what his attitudes are towards women and how much he feels like women were put on this earth to do for him. That's not going to happen in therapy. So the kind of place you would send a narcissist wouldn't even address the problem. You're dealing with an abuser.
Right. So does that therapy, is that effective therapy, the abuser therapy, the re-educating?
Yeah, I mean, we don't even call it therapy because it's not, to make it so clear that it's not therapy. It's called intervention. It's called abuser intervention services. Okay. And if it's well run, it has some success, but only in the context where the guy has also been in serious legal trouble for the abuse. It doesn't help if he's been in legal trouble for other things. He has to have been in legal trouble for the abuse. And I find a number of other things have to line up. Like he has to really tell the full truth about what he did. They don't change while they're still denying 80 or even 20% of what they've done. And he's got to have other people in his life besides his victim who are standing up to him about it. Like he's got to have his own friends and relatives calling him out on it instead of all these people backing him up.
Right.
So it's not that abusers can't change. It's just that the kinds of things that I'm saying have to line up in order for him to change. You don't get those things to line up very often.
And that's, I think, the coercion and the fear too, right? If you are an abusive guy, forget about narcissism. If you're a loud, boisterous, scary dude who is very, very scary behind closed doors with family and whatever, and those volatile moments come out with family and friends or on the work site or corporate boardroom even, how likely are people to like have some sort of intervention and say, hey, John, you really need to.
Well, this is an interesting thing though. Most abusers, no one ever sees that intimidating side except for women that he's involved with. It doesn't typically come out in any of those other contexts. So it's typically not that other people are afraid of him. It's much more common that other people are swayed by him because he's so convincing, and that other people, unfortunately, whether they're conscious of it or not, share his values, because the values that an abuser has are very widespread through the society. If for example, if a woman gets hit by a man, it's not just the abusers that are asking her, well, what did you do? It's like her own friends and relatives are asking her, what did you do? Well, as soon as you ask her, what did you do? You're adopting the abuser's set of values.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so unfortunately, those values are really rampant through our society. And it's not only men that have them. These attitudes that women should cater to men, that if a man gets intimidating, well, you sort of have to understand that at a certain point, because after all, he was going through this, and this, and this, there's always excuses for him. These are very widespread problems. And so there's multiple reasons why he typically does not have anyone in his life other than the abused woman standing up to him about how abusive he is. Now, I've occasionally had clients where there were other people, where his own relatives, including sometimes his own mom, started to say to him, you treat women terribly, or his own brother said to him, like, you got to stop blaming the women you abuse, like this is your issue. And then that has helped my work a lot as a counselor, the times that that he's had that in his life, but I can't say he's had that in his life very often among the clients that I've had.
So that's interesting. I just caught myself, I'm making two buckets on my little piece of paper here. I have the abuser bucket, and then I have the narcissist/abuser bucket, right? And so when I asked that question, I was thinking about the abuser. I have actually a person in mind who his mother knows he's abusive, and his sisters, and has warned girlfriends, and, kind of behind the scenes. So maybe that's an anomaly. So really some of this is where it gets tricky, making that distinction between the abuser and the narcissist, because what you're saying is true. Those abusers really are the charming, outwardly, they look one way, just like the narcissist is able to charm and manipulate. It sounds like the abuser is very similar in that they're, they have this external persona, and then behind closed doors, they're just losing it. And
that's right. That's another reason I think why the two get mixed together in mistaken ways, is that they both do quite a bit of work on collecting allies.
And one thing that you said, I just wanted to ask you a question about. So one of the things you said is with narcissists, they tend to hurt themselves in some way. Could you give some examples of that, what you mean?
Well, so for example, a narcissist is typically going to have times when, well, because it is a mental health problem, they're not going to always be perfectly strategic. And so they're going to end up sometimes behaving destructively in ways that really come back on them. So, for example, a narcissist is someone who eventually, not necessarily right away, but eventually where they work, people start to realize this person's a problem.
Yeah.
Whereas the abuser where he works, he can be there for 30 years and no one will know because he doesn't have these issues in how he interacts with people, except if they're his partners or his former partners. And the narcissist eventually is going to have these issues with anyone that they have a really substantial relationship with.
Okay.
And again, not necessarily with everyone, but with everyone that they have a really substantial relationship with. And I don't just mean a relationship of intimacy. It can be a work relationship. It can be a church relationship. It can be their own relatives. Start to realize, like one of the things you notice with the narcissist is that when you try to call them out on things they did that upset you, they cannot examine their own behavior, at least not for any length of time. It's like they have to put it back on you, or they have to apologize in these kinds of rude ways, or they have to act like you're victimizing them by complaining about what they did, like, oh, poor me, you took what I did the wrong way, or poor me, you just think I'm that kind of person, and that's why, it's this whole routine. Well, the abuser doesn't do that. Unless he truly does have some narcissistic qualities, he doesn't do that on other fronts in his life. And so his behavior almost never ends up costing him. And the narcissist leaves a trail behind him or her, but in this case, we're talking about the male, leaves a trail behind him of people who can't stand him. And of people who will continue to just idolize him and say, oh, he's awesome. He was the most loving and generous person. He did this for me. He did that for me. And then you'll have these other people saying, oh yeah, it was like that for a while, and now I hate his guts. The abuser does not typically have this kind of trail behind him, except of his past partners.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So it's just that complete inability to own anything, really. There's no self-reflection. There's no ownership with the narcissist. They cannot, I mean, it could be, it's forget the relationship. It could be, oh, you didn't pay your part of that bar bill or whatever. Like they're like, no. Like, just, it's such a wound. Everything's a wound. So potential attack.
Exactly. So here's another concept that might be useful for folks, is the difference between unwillingness and inability. The narcissist is unable to consider what their role was in behaving destructively. Like they can't even face the possibility that maybe they did do something really crappy.
Right.
The abuser is unwilling, not unable to look at himself. And so in contexts where it's in his best interest to look at himself, he'll do it. Like if you're at a job where it's a thing like, well, I better look at myself here or I'm going to lose my job, he'll look at himself.
Okay. But
when partners are confronting him, well, he doesn't believe a partner has a right to confront him. He doesn't believe a partner has a right to call him out. He believes he's above that. And so he's unwilling to look at himself, and it comes out looking as if he's unable to look at himself.
So one thing this brings up is probably a recurring question for you. So women always, when the relationship's over or ending, women, and then there's this whole sorry phase and love bombing and stuff. Well, what I know of narcissists, and I've been with a few, is that they seem to be unable, because of that, that actual personality disorder and their past, they seem unable to have true intimacy. It scares them. They shut down, like they just don't know what to do with it. With the abuser, is that the same? If I'm assuming they don't have the narcissistic traits, can they have an actual intimate scenario? Well, I know they all have their version of love.
To some extent they can. The problem is not with the abuser is not that intimacy terrifies him the way true intimacy terrifies him the way it terrifies a narcissist, as you're pointing out.
Yeah.
The problem with the abuser is he can't be truly intimate with a woman because he can't respect a woman enough
Exactly.
to be truly intimate with her. He
Yeah.
can't see a woman as a human being in that sense. He sees her as a set of services that she provides him. And I don't just mean like literal old-fashioned services like make him the meals and do the ironing and clean the house, although a lot of abusers do expect that also.
Yeah.
But it's services like, it's like providing him sexual service. It's like all these emotional services that you're supposed to attend to him and build his ego up and tell him what a great guy he is. And you're supposed to give up all your friends and just be totally focused on him. And, you know, your whole life is just supposed to revolve around what he might need. And it's like, well, why didn't you call me? You should have known that I wouldn't, you know, all this stuff. Like you're supposed to not only cater to his every need, you're supposed to be able to guess his every need.
Right.
And so the reason why he doesn't have intimate truly meaningful, lasting, intimate connections with a woman is completely different from the reasons. It's not that it scares him.
Right. It's just that he doesn't have in order to have true intimacy, you do need respect, and you can't be seeing the person as an object or a set of services where they're
exactly
like chattel. Yeah.
Exactly. You've got to be able to really connect with this person as a human being, or it's not a real connection.
Got it. I think that's really important for women who are looking for these partnerships. And if somebody is romantic and exciting and sexy and slightly domineering, but they also have this abusive quality, they think, well, if the light bulb goes off with that abusive stuff, then maybe there's a chance for them to be whatever the, fantasy person is in their head. And I just think it's a long road to ever, it's a lot. There's probably better guys out there.
The things that you say, Stephanie, are so sharp and so on point. I really appreciate that. And I mean, you just pointed to another one that is so key, which is that the society works in so many ways to train women to be attracted to exactly what's most dangerous, and then blames women for being attracted to that. It's like, well, you gave me a message all my life that that's exactly what I should be attracted to. This kind of, take charge kind of guy like you're talking about, and the guy who's totally smooth and, has like a whole flair to him, and he shows up at the door with flowers, and women never get a message. No, connect with a guy who's actually sees you as a person. Connect with a guy who's actually interested in what interests you, like would actually like to get to know you, who rather than trying to figure out how to knock down all your differences, the ways that you're different from him, is interested in learning about the ways you're different from him and thinking about how are we going to live with our differences rather than how can I knock your differences out of you.
Right.
And so I read the first 20 pages. It was as much as I could stomach, but I read the first 20 pages of Shades of Grey.
Okay.
And on the one hand, I understand the appeal of this book to women because there is so little erotica out there that is for women. It's almost all aimed at men.
Yeah.
I mean, there's very little what I would call erotica out there, period. It's mostly pornography. Unfortunately, Shades of Grey is pornography also. It's not what I would call erotica. But because it's something erotic that's aimed at women, it's like, oh, thank God, something that's finally aimed at women that's erotic. And it's a disaster area. And it's in the first 20 pages, he has covered something like 10 out of 12 of the warning signs that I teach teenage girls about domestic abuse. But it's being presented as really sexy and appealing. So it's an example of exactly what you're talking about, and what I'm totally resonating with, that women are being conditioned to feel sexually turned on by what's most dangerous, and to believe that somehow a guy who doesn't have these qualities isn't really a sexy guy. It's like there are guys out there who are really sexy, who treat women well. It's like that's the notion that somehow what makes a guy sexy is being kind of a jerk is a horrible, horrible message.
Wow, that is powerful. Yeah, I boycotted the book, the movie, the whole thing. Like, I had so many friends trying to push that book on me, and then the movie came out. I agree. I feel like it's just perpetuating this awful thought. And I think that because we are so conditioned to those kinds of things, that if you've never had, you know, a truly nice, sweet guy who's respectful, who's not, you know, as exciting per se, because he's not, you know, dangerous or adventurous or whatever, you might not even have any sense of how exciting that deep, passionate, intimate connection and fully being seen as a human being, as a woman. You have no concept of what that would feel like, because there aren't a lot of books written about that. Maybe The Notebook is the only thing that's like more sweet, but there's a real lack of that.
We're really conditioned, I think men too. I think men and women are conditioned to really look at the surface of things and not focus nearly enough on the substance. Yeah.
I could go into a whole other thing about this article I just read, but it's way too deep. We'll talk about that another time. But so people listening are either in a relationship, they got out, they're still healing. And I think most of us who've gotten out are like, holy crap, I really thought it was going to be so much easier on the other side. If you're a mom, there's a whole other piece with children, with custody. And I know we could dive into that, but then there's an even bigger piece beyond that, which is just emotional healing. So I really wanted to jump into, because we're going into one of the worst, I think, abusive, narcissistic, scary seasons, which is just this holiday season where there's so much pressure, and it's where people start to act out. There's weird family dynamics. So I wanted to talk about the joyous recovery. Yeah, I have your book right in front of me. So I read that, and then I called you. I tried to reach out to you immediately. I'm like, oh my God, this is what we all need. We're all looking for connection. We're so starved with COVID and all this stuff I think it's never been clearer that people need people, and we need some sort of human connection. And you just put a whole much bigger layer on that really appealed to me. So I would love to have you talk about your Peak Living Network. So
thank you. But let me start by saying that I listened to the podcast that you did where a lot of it was devoted to talking about the Peak Living Network, and you explained it all better than I do. I mean, you articulated it so well. I was really moved listening to you, because I felt like, wow, she really, really gets what I'm trying to do and what we're trying to do, the we of the Peak Living Network. And so the Peak Living Network is not related specifically to healing from an abusive relationship. It's not specifically a network for women. We love to have men, and we're encouraging men to join, not if they have histories of abusing women, though. If they have histories of abusing women, they're not welcome with us, because we do want the network to be a place that feels safe for women who are coming off of abusive relationships, even though that's not specifically what we're about. And so we're a free, cooperatively run organization, and there are a couple central principles in how we support people in their emotional healing. But perhaps the most important one for people to be aware of is that we are an organization that's devoted to the notion of keeping give and take pretty equally. Keeping them pretty equal, give and take. Mm-hmm. And so we're really different from like a social service that you could go to for support and help, because the Peak Living Network is something you come to give and receive, both in fairly equal measure, support. And so it's not, for example, a good place for people to come to who are still in very active crisis in their lives, and really need the focus to be on like how you can help me, what I would call one-way help. One-way help is a great thing, and there are places to look for that. That's just not, the Peak Living Network is about two-way help. We're about teaching people how to work in pairs, and how to work in threes, and how to work in groups, to all take care of each other and to all support each other's emotional healing. We teach this two-way practice called co-counseling. Mm-hmm. And we do various other kinds of approaches to helping people learn how can we be more effectively there for each other. Right. And so the idea is that we're gonna keep things pretty balanced. And some people don't want to take that on, and I completely respect and understand that. Some people say, like, I'm just not at a place in my life where I can focus on taking care of other people right now. That wouldn't even be good for me right now. Exactly. Totally respect that. And that's just not what the Peak Living Network is about. The Peak Living Network is for people who feel like, okay, yeah, I could take on being there for other people as long as they're really going to also be there for me.
Right.
And that's, but then we have a couple of other things that are really important in the Peak Living Network that I think distinguish us from some other support systems. The one is that we have an agreement that we don't give advice. And that's really different from most places you're going to go. Most places you're going to go, you're going to hear lots of, well, you should do this, and you should do this, and have you tried this, and have you tried this? And we try to steer very hard away from that in the Peak Living Network. We're in the business of giving emotional support, asking questions, helping people feel their feelings, helping people really get their feelings out. A lot of what we talk about is helping people really get their feelings out, which is a whole other subject. How do you get all this pain out of you so you're not carrying this pain around for the rest of your life? And we're about equality. So it's very different from, say, a relationship with a therapist, which in some ways is an inherently unequal relationship. And I'm not criticizing that. It has its place. Right. But again, it's just a different kind of relationship. You go to a therapist, they're like, you're giving them money, and they're like the one with the training and the experience. And so in a certain sense, they're in a superior position, like in their word tends to carry a little more weight than yours, which to me, that part is a bit of a problem, actually.
I agree.
And say, oh no, you should do this or you should do that. Again, sometimes therapists do start to be pretty directive about what, in fact, sometimes people start to get in the habit of calling their therapist to ask, what should I do?
Exactly.
And so that's completely different from how we deal with things in the Peak Living Network. And most people experience that as a relief, honestly. Huge. Like, I can talk about all the stuff that's going on with me and not just hear a barrage of, well, have you tried this, and have you tried this, and you should, go to this website and read this book and stuff. It's people are so relieved to not be facing that and be able to just get a bunch of real support and understanding and thoughtful questions and a safe place to get their feelings out. Yeah.
I mean, I heard the term holding space years ago, and I was like, what does that really mean? But I feel like you that's what you're doing with this program, because people aren't used to it. It's like, oh, somebody's coming to me and they're bearing their soul. They probably want advice. No, maybe they just really need you to hear them. They need you to look you in the eye and see you emote that this is challenging. This is painful, what I shared. And, just reflecting back at them, the depth of their pain, or if they're laughing with them and really releasing. And that releasing piece is huge, because a lot of people get numb when they come out of these relationships. You've lost a little bit, maybe you're finding it, but your true north, and you know who you were before this damaging relationship, or maybe you grew up in a damaging relationship and then you just got more of it. So you're like, who the hell am I really? Why was I even put on this earth? So you're searching. And then you go into that dynamic with a therapist, and you're so used to giving power to somebody else that it sometimes can create that dynamic again. And I have so many friends, and I've experienced myself with a therapist who's a therapist for my children. They have too much power and they do create damage. And maybe I think some of them even enjoy it. And I don't want to say anything bad about all therapists. I'm just saying there are some out there that are in this because of the role of somebody who can kind of dictate or direct or whatever. So it's really refreshing to be in a safe space where you can be heard, express yourself, and all the things you just said, but also have the other person, you can give that back to them, which I think that's a great practice too, is learning how to be different from what we've been kind of trained to do.
Yeah. In this healing system that we teach in the Peak Living Network, co-counseling, the counselor never plays any role of telling the client what they should work on. Like, they would never say, oh, I think you should look at this, or I think you should spend some time focusing on this. Like, we would never dream of going there. That would just be completely unacceptable. I want to actually add one thing back on the advice question. And this is an exercise that I actually do when I'm teaching classes in the Peak Living Network, is I ask people, think back for the last whatever period of your life, 20 years, 30 years, your whole life, whatever you want to think about. And think about, like, the 3 or 4 people who you feel like really have come through for you. Maybe they came through for you as a kid, maybe they came through for you as an adult, maybe they came through for you in a crisis, but just try to remember, like, ooh, this person, we've all had, even people who've had really hard lives, at some point you've had someone who came through for you around things. So remember those people for a moment, and then try to remember advice that they gave you. And you usually won't be able to remember any advice that they gave you. The advice that they gave you was not what you're remembering. What you're remembering is their love, their presence, their validation, the way they looked at you, maybe the way they held you if you needed physical reassurance and physical comfort. That's what we remember. That's what makes a difference to us. And yet, when it's the other way around and the other person's in need, we think, oh, I've got to have advice for them.
Right.
So we can train ourselves out of that. We can start to remember, wait a minute, I wasn't looking for advice, so let's not assume that this person's looking for advice. And I was saying what a relief it is to not get advice. It's also a huge relief to stop giving advice. So you end up relieving people on both ends of the interaction, and they can focus much more on connection. One of the things I loved about your podcast about the Peak Living Network, Stephanie, was how much you kept talking about connection. And I just think that's so crucial. I mean, that's on such a deep level is what we're all most craving in life, is connection.
100%. Yeah. I mean, this is, before I called you, I had this sort of weird nudge on the shoulder. I call it the nod from God, or the nudge or whatever. And I wrote down this description for this group. And it's called Gather, Connect, Heal, the People Need People movement. And I held on to it for a while, and I've been in your group, your co-counseling group, learning from you. It's been wonderful. I feel more like myself and more grounded. This is the time of year I have a tough time because I have seasonal affective disorder. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I've got a lot of stuff going on with my kids and my ex and blah. But I feel really grounded. So I have a lot going on with my business, but I was able to get that out on a Friday. Within 2 or 3 days, I had 62 people in this group. None of them know me. I have not told any of my friends. This is the first time announcing that I even have a group. And today it's close to 80 people in it's Boston area. And so I'm going to tell them about you. I would love to have you come at some point and talk about Peak Living Network. But these are just men and women who, I'll send you the description, who are just seeking connection, and they feel like maybe something happened spiritually. They're like all the old stuff that worked maybe isn't working, because we've been through so much in the last almost 2 years now, and they just want people who are genuine, who are not going to be on the surface and all of that, like just outside of the family expectations, the societal expectations, just really wanting to be able to be real and be yourself and be seen. And yeah, I'll send you the description, but I was in shock. I posted it, ignored it, did stuff, then went back, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy.
Good for you. That's excellent. And I would be honored to come and talk to this group. I'd be thrilled.
Yeah. So now I just got to figure out how to do it. I'm like, okay, careful what you wish for.
Well, I'm happy to talk about that too.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. I know we talked about all these different things we could cover, and we didn't cover all of it as you predicted, but I would love to have you back on for a part 2 or 3.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Is there anything you want to leave us with the rest of this episode?
Well, just that it's really easy for the darkness, the literal darkness of the days, to, particularly for people who live in the temperate regions where the days are so short right now, to mix with how loaded the holidays are and create a really dark mood for people, and for people who are in an abusive relationship or have come off of one, or people who have really toxic relatives. This is a really, really tough time. So I just want to say it's the darkness is not the whole story. It feels very real while we're in it. When you get into one of those dark places, for any of us, when we get into one of those dark places, it feels like this is the ultimate truth about the nature of life and the nature of reality. And it isn't. It's only part of the story. It's a real thing, but it's only part of the story. there is also love. There are also friends. There are people who are not toxic. There are whole families that aren't toxic to each other.
Right.
There are places to reach out for support, connect with, even if it has to be online, reach out for connection, try to not just sink into isolation, and know that there are people who care about you, and there are people who don't even know you yet who will care about you once they get to know you. And just know that in some collective sense, I and a lot of other people are thinking of you. Let's all think about each other as we go through these next few weeks.
I love that. Yeah. The power of just, again, holding all the people like us or whatever in a good place, and just kind of sending that energy out there. We're all connected, whether we know it or not. So I love that. Thank you, Lundy. We did it.
You're very welcome. Awesome talking to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you too. I hope you have an awesome day.